Oscar Tennyson grabbed his purchases and hurried after the rest of his crew. As usual, they were walking quickly on their longer legs and bellowing for him to keep up. The Teeth and Scales Mighty had no patience for human weaknesses, of which there were many. But, as Oscar had just learned, there were some strengths as well, and he couldn't wait to show them. He scampered on board before the door shut, wondering if they would actually leave without him if he dawdled too long. Probably not. Who would handle their finances and hunting permits? They'd have to hire someone else, because they certainly didn't want to do it themselves. But he didn't want to test that. He had much better things to test. While the stark metal walls vibrated with the engine's revs, Oscar wove between scaled biceps and towels to his own quarters. He pressed the panel by the door, which was oversized and crackled like all of them on this ship. The Mighty were not fans of fiddly little buttons or keys, not when they could have panels big enough to punch, which only broke sometimes. When Oscar stepped through and closed the door behind him, he felt immediately relieved. This was his private space to decorate as he chose, without worrying that someone would take things down or make fun of him. Ship rules were clear about personal quarters. Oscar's fake orchids and real cactus made the room homey, along with more posters than the walls could hold. They spilled onto the ceiling, aligning it with nature scenes from Earth, sports figures he admired, media announcements, and a good number of fluffy kittens. This was the one spot on the ship where he could feel comfortable, and he was making the most of it. The bag of refueling station supplies crinkled as he set it on his small table to remove the contents. A high-end store might have had water wheel bags that evaporated after a day, but this place used regular old plastic. Inside were food cubes, bottled water, and the purchase he was most excited about: 6 cans of very weak caffeine. He scanned the label. It was just like the other human had said. Tall cans in dramatic colours, but not much of substance inside. At least, not as far as the average human was concerned. Oscar couldn't wait until dinner time. Before then, he had a permit to submit, and several other things to check. The ship should be on the way to Argosha, which was notorious for welcoming outsiders to hunt the dagger birds that were giving everyone so much trouble, but he had better get their paperwork in order anyway. He grabbed his tablet and left his safe haven, heading back into the public parts of the ship where he could face taunts from any direction. Really, these guys were just like his cousins. At least it was familiar. Fending off tiresome conversation, "How's the weather down there? Why don't you ask your mother?" He reached the bridge and found a corner to stand in. The captain and the pilot were arguing about where to land when they reached Argosha. "The main site will have more people to admire our ship. The new one is closer to the hunting grounds. Dagger birds are overrunning the place. Everywhere is a hunting ground. Do you want to pay the damages for shooting a building instead of a bird? We can take it all out of your pay if you want. Fine, but if we land on some overgrown hedge and the ship is scratched, you get to pay for that. Fine." The pair of them stopped yelling and sat back in their seats as if nothing at all was the matter, because it wasn't. Polite disagreements were always held at that volume. In the brief lull while the pilot manipulated the controls with more force than a lesser console could withstand, Oscar spoke up. "I'd like to come too." Both dinosaurian heads turned to stare at him in surprise. "Why?" the captain demanded. "One kick from a bird and you're useless to us." "Thanks," Oscar said flatly. "I'll keep out of the way. I want to take photos of your fighting prowess. I should be able to sell them." Both of the Mighty preened at that, as he'd known they would. Ego was big here. The captain agreed, and Oscar didn't let slip any hints of his secret plan. He just finished working on his tablet, then retreated to his quarters to practice daggerbird mating calls. The air on Argosha was breathable but hot, at least this part of it. Oscar was ready with his tool in his pocket. He'd gotten out of the habit of calling it a phone, since the Mighty were right in that it did a near infinite number of things. He still smirked quietly at the potential innuendo, but it was a conversation he didn't really want to have with giant dinosaur aliens, so he kept that to himself. "This way," announced the captain, pointing in what looked like an arbitrary direction into the wilderness. Whooping with the alien equivalent of testosterone, the crew raised their blasters and tromped off the landing pad, with Oscar following close behind. True to his word, he did take some pictures as he went, but he was waiting for his moment. It didn't take long to come. The shouting scared off all the wildlife, then the mighty found a boulder to crouch behind and wait for the creatures to come back. They played a silent counting game to see who was the best at guessing when they spot something worth killing. Distant footsteps on leaves made them smack each other in excitement, but nothing appeared between the trees. Now or never, Oscar thought. Knowing better than to startle his crewmates, he whispered, "Here, let me." Then he took a deep breath and let loose with his best imitation of a daggerbird seeking a mate. Whack! While the mighty shushed him and wondered what he was doing and started to figure it out, an answering whack sounded from nearby. Then another. Then 3. Oscar wondered if he'd overplayed his hand. No less than 5 large and eager daggerbirds crashed through the undergrowth at once, croaking and flapping, taking offense at each other's presence. The mighty all roared and leapt out, firing in every direction. Oscar dashed for a tree he'd been eyeing, the one with lots of branches, and didn't stop climbing until he was out of beak-stabbing range. He held tight to the trunk, catching his breath and watching the chaos. But latterly, he remembered to take out his tool and snap some photos. This was actually a good angle. He got a great shot of the captain aiming down the throat of a wide-open beak, then another a split second later when the beak snapped shut inches from his head. Another of the engineers shooting one from beneath. 2 of the pilots tackling the largest bird and sinking teeth into the back of his neck where it couldn't reach to stab. Other species did their trophy hunting from a distance. The mighty liked the fight as much as the kill. Their blasters were set on a deliberately low setting, and their teeth were sharp. Safe up in his tree, Oscar grimaced at how bloody things were getting down below. He yelled another bird call to distract the one about to spear the crewmate who'd been knocked to the ground, and he got a cheerful, "Nice save by the little guy," which was as close to a thank you as he was going to get. The crewmate scrambled up and bit off a chunk while the bird was distracted. A couple of the crew looked like they were bleeding their own blood, but most of it was coming from the daggerbirds, which were just as stubborn as the stories had said. Not one of them ran off. The last to die fell on top of somebody, which just added laughter from the rest of the crew to the triumphant cheers. Oscar took a picture of the bird being dragged off by his disgraced crewmate. That photo he wouldn't sell, but would keep as minor blackmail if he ever needed it. Sticking it up on the wall to remind everyone of this moment could be a valuable strategic move. "We are the mighty," bellowed the captain, and the whole crew joined in with a deep-voiced cheer. Oscar climbed down to more approval than he'd gotten in the last month. "Good work by our human here. Who knew you could do that?" "That's sure an efficient way to hunt. We should bring you out every time. That was great." Oscar took the praise with pride, not bothering with modesty. There was just another word for weakness as far as these guys were concerned. He managed to dodge when one of them made to slap him on the back with a large blood-stained hand, which just made them laugh more. Luckily, the captain directed everybody to gather their kills for dragging back to the ship, rather than chasing the human and messing up his clothes. Oscar took a position on the lowest branch of his tree, and taking a couple more photos as the victorious hunters figured out how to get it all home. If anyone had asked Oscar, which they never would, he'd have suggested going back for a hovercart or taking them one at a time, but of course they did neither. Definitely the type to insist on carrying all the groceries in at once, Oscar thought, as his crewmates strained to drag the giant carcasses through the undergrowth. He hopped down and kept pace out to the side, where there was no blood on the leaves. They finally made it back to the ship, doing nothing to clean up the smears of blood they left on the landing pad. Oscar darted off to his quarters as soon as the door opened. The rest of them could handle getting the birds into cryostorage or chopped up right away, whichever they saw fit to do. The lowest ranking one without significant injuries would be in charge of cleaning the blood from the hallways, but only after they had all taken a walk through the water and air blast chamber that passed for a shower here. It had always reminded Oscar of a car wash. He kept to himself until dinner, sorting his photos while everyone else dealt with the catch and the mess and the injuries. The mechanical med system on this ship was just as efficient as a shower. They'd all be in decent shape by mealtime. And mealtime after a successful hunt was also drinking time. Oscar usually ate in his room, wanting nothing to do with the Rorschach's meat-tearing and drunkenness. But today was different because he learned something valuable about the liquid they were getting drunk off. Oscar considered the cans he bought, then decided it would have more of an impact if he just took one of the communal supply. So instead, he grabbed his new food cubes and a pre-made tin of spaghetti from his mini-cryo, and followed the sound of laughter. They were already a little drunk when he got there. Sprawled across chairs with a table full of meat slabs spilling over the edges of the plates. And as expected, there were tall purple cans everywhere. "Hey, it's the little guy. Let's hear it for the human with the surprise talent. Maybe you're not so useless after all." "Thanks," Oscar said, as they pounded fists against anything in reach as a form of applause. He leaned against the open doorway and shuffled his belongings, so he could get a fork and a meatball without setting down the food cubes. That was pretty easy where I'm from. You guys really can't do that? He popped the meatball into his mouth, casual as you please. The mighty, of course, thought this was funny, and took it in stride. More gulps from their drinks, more savage mouthfuls of food, and a few questions about the surely excellent photos he'd gotten, which would make them all look amazing. Oscar said he shared the best ones. These would make fine decorations in their own quarters, and would probably be appreciated by the right paying audience. Then came the moment he'd been waiting for. The captain raised his drink in another cheer, and somebody noticed that the human was the only one without a can in his hand. "Get the human a warrior's drink." "Bet you he passes out after one sip." "Nah, he can take at least two." Oscar smiled quietly. If they'd been paying attention, they might have changed their bets at that smile. He set his food down in the hallway to free his hands. When one muscular taloned arm offered him a can of their most potent intoxicant, he took it. Oh, so casually. Then he whipped his head back and chugged the whole thing. "Oh! Human's gonna die! I'm not cleaning up the puke. What the supernova? There are better ways to go than that. Somebody drag him to medical so we don't have to find somebody else to do the boring stuff. Yeah, he was just getting interesting." Oscar ignored all of them, giving the empty can a thoughtful look. It felt like the same thin aluminium he remembered from Earth, and if there was anything his cousins had taught him, it was the proper way to dispose of a beer can. He dug his fingers in and crushed it against his forehead. Then, while the room reacted to that, he wiped off the drips and threw the can across the room. When it went into the trash on the first try, he was internally very glad, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he picked up his food and resumed eating. "What's the big deal?" he said. "Is that what you guys have been getting drunk off? How quaint." "How in all the black holes? Nope. He's gonna fall over any second. Just watch." "Quaint? That's hilarious." "He's totally bluffing. Just wait and see." Oscar was enjoying being the center of the crew's attention today. He made a show of sweeping his eyes across the various cans in the room. "None of you has finished a can yet, I see. Was that supposed to be strong?" There was widespread laughing and elbowing of each other, most of them still clearly convinced that the silly little human was going to throw up and die any second now. So Oscar set down his food, walked over to the table and chugged a second one. It was a bit more liquid than his stomach was really happy with, but there was a small price to pay for the uproar that followed. They exclaimed. They renewed their bets. They drank from their own cans. They got visibly drunker and abandoned their bets. Oscar leaned against the doorframe, eating spaghetti and food cubes. After one particularly unsteady crewmate tripped onto the table full of meat, and somebody pointed out that the human wasn't wobbling at all, Oscar said, "You guys don't know much about my species, do you? Half of what I eat would liquefy your insides." He held up a food cube, eyeing the different coloured specks of all the ingredients that made it balanced for an omnivorous digestive system. He laughed. "You guys just eat meat. How boring." They only got drunker after that. Oscar was pretty sure that the nearest two wanted to pat him on the back, but the floor was moving too much for them to make it all the way to the doorway. Someone offered him a raw slab of daggerbird. He turned it down with casual scorn. "Nah, meat isn't worth eating unless it's passed through fire. That's weakling meat you've got there. Get back to me when it's cooked brown." They loved that. The party was an epic one, only winding down when most of the crew was too drunk to reach more drinks. Oscar demonstrated his steadiness by picking through the mess to drop his food containers in the trash, then moved back to the door. "Well, it's been fun," he said. "I'll send in the med drone to make sure nobody's going to wake up dead. Let me know if you want to get your tails handed to you by any more daggerbirds. I'll call them in close for you again." He got groggy approval to that. Oscar left with a smile on his face, and a mild amount of caffeine in his blood. Maybe after stopping by the med center, he'd use that energy on some exercise. Thoughts of the run to the hunting grounds and the way his crewmates had paced themselves suggested that it wouldn't take much practice for him to out-endurance the mighty on the VR treadmill. "I wonder what else I can do,"